This Thanksgiving in Albuquerque had more domestic violence calls than the holiday has seen in a decade. Advocates say this could be part of a disturbing phenomenon. News 13's Natalie Wattis joins us live in the Newsplex with more details. Natalie?
Jess, law enforcement tells me the holidays do tend to cause police calls to increase. But over the course of this holiday weekend, APD had to respond to more than 200 domestic violence calls.
Typically, we averaged on Thanksgiving Day itself right in the mid-40s in domestic violence calls, and this past Thanksgiving, we're somewhere in the mid-70s on domestic violence calls on Thanksgiving itself.
In a tweet, Police Chief Harold Medina wrote that officers responded to 207 domestic violence calls between Wednesday and Saturday morning.
Not only did we see that increase in calls for service for domestic violence, but we also did see, we had a homicide that was domestic violence related. We had a non-fatal shooting that was domestic violence related. We had 4 SWAT activations that were domestic violence related, and we saw an almost doubling of the use of force that our officers are using.
A 46% increase in calls from the same 3-day period the week before, and more calls on Thanksgiving Day than they'd seen in a decade.
Albuquerque is incredibly violent right now. I've heard statistics that we're in the top 10 for violence, and I am incredibly worried for my community.
Advocates who work with domestic violence victims say while the holidays tend to be a time of increased violence, there might be more at play this year. Gail Starr, clinical coordinator for Albuquerque SANE, a treatment center for people who have experienced sexual and domestic violence, says studies show domestic violence increases after disaster.
They've shown after hurricanes. Australia has done a lot of studies after bushfires and stuff like that, but Louisiana after Katrina, they showed a spike in domestic violence as well. I believe that COVID has definitely worked to make more stressors. Definitely. This is one of the most stressful things I've seen in my life.
And Starr says we may be seeing the after effects.
Those stressors take a while, that it can show up 18 months after the start of a disaster.
Chief Medina says the increasing domestic violence calls do put a strain on the department, and they're looking at giving extra training to field officers to better respond since they do not have a dedicated domestic violence unit. Back to you.
All right. Thank you, Natalie. Chief Medina says domestic violence calls are some of the most dangerous situations police can encounter because of how they can escalate.